evening and welcome to our show this Sunday night. Very important discussion to be had. And I'm glad that you found the time to join us this evening. We're speaking to Professor William Gumede. He's the founder and executive chairperson for the Democracy Works Foundation and also the executive chairperson of, what is your foundation's name again, William?
It's Democracy Works Foundation. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Made Foundation. Yeah, and thank you also for joining us, Vinka Kachur. Thank you also for joining us. She is at the Center for Complex Systems in Transition at the University of Stellenbosch. Very important discussion that we must have. We all saw the fallout in the United States on Friday. There has been so many divisive responses, but there are some truths and lies that was perpetuated in that meeting in the Oval Office. Zvinka, can you give us clearly, before we ask William for his impressions, give us a sense of what untruths, what lies was perpetuated in that fallout that we saw?
Thanks, Lynette. I think the question of just peace for Ukraine is probably a critical question because what we can see that Russia has invaded Ukraine originally in 2014 and then with the full-scale invasion in 2022. So for that war to stop, it's very easy. Russia can simply remove its military forces. But Russia is not ready to stop this war. And we can see it from Lavrov's statement, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, on the 28th of February, where he says that they want to still claim more land, because currently Russian constitution has declared that 4 Ukrainian regions, which have not yet been occupied, should be part of Russia. So this is the demand of Russia for peace, for ceasefire. So this is something that Ukraine cannot agree, because it means giving up people's lives without even a fight. But Ukraine has been fighting since 2014 and especially since 2022, specifically for people not to suffer from occupation, from oppression. So I think that question of just peace and what is possible for Ukraine to achieve peace was manipulated, because Russia is not ready for peace and they're openly stating this.
But you got the impression from Donald Trump that, and he even accused Zelensky of the fact that he was the aggressor and that he wasn't interested in peace. But how do you even start a conversation about peace, William, when Ukraine is not at the table, that it's between the USA and Russia?
No, absolutely. I mean, you can't have a conversation about peace in Ukraine if Ukraine is not part of the conversation. I think for me, it's just the interesting thing is, a couple of years ago, we talked about globally about a post-truth era that we have, where truth is manipulated, where one doesn't actually really know anymore what is truth and what is lies. I mean, just think about Trump now saying that or implying that, it was Ukraine that was responsible for the war. I mean, and we all know that it was an invasion from Russia. And so on. I think that's the first. I think for me also the second issue is just how the Trump administration now has changed the US's foreign policy also. So the US clearly now under Trump, and I think we've seen it now with Ukraine, does not embrace democracies anymore. The US tradition in the post-war period was the big promoter of democracies, the defender of democracies around the world. And now I think there's some dramatic change under the Trump administration. I mean, to support Putin and autocrats and to leave out Ukraine's a democracy. And we also know that one of the reasons why Russia invaded Ukraine was also because it's a democracy on its doorstep. It's a proper democracy on its doorstep, and so on. I mean, that is also one of the reasons. I think, it really is a shift in the world. I mean, it's a sort of not only post-truth, but it's post the rules, we global rules, and also post democracy almost. It is post the period where where democracies have been supported around the world and defended, to now a very uncertain period where democracy seems to be cast aside in favor of dictators and autocratic governments.
One of the other lies that he peddled, Zvinka, was that the supporter of Ukraine has been the USA, that if it wasn't for the USA, the war would have been over and done with in the first 2 weeks. But we know, looking at the allies and their support and the USA support, that is not true.
Yes, but I think it's maybe not the best thing to look at how much each country is supported, but rather that we still need to stay united to defend Ukrainian territorial integrity and to stop from opening up and redrawing borders of other countries, because it's a very serious issue if we allow that to happen. It means that our world will definitely go into more militarized stage. We already there, but I still believe that people can claim democracy of their country. They can do that in any country. It's people's responsibility to hold their government accountable. And I think those countries that maybe are hesitating, and those maybe presidents and governments that might be taking more of the right from people, hopefully will face that opposition. We've seen that in Ukraine multiple times when people, the elections were not free, then people went to the streets and demanded free and fair elections. And Ukraine did have re-elections in 2004 when the Russian candidate has made some fraudulent influence. And it was the same in 2013 when Ukrainian president was trying to manipulate the constitution. Ukrainian people went to the street and demanded that Ukraine stays a democratic country. If we look at the percentage of support from different countries, we will see that the largest percent of GDP paid those countries that are Russian neighbors. It's Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. It's also Poland. So those countries that understand they can be next under attack of Russia, they obviously stand the strongest and ready to commit the highest percentage. But in overall numbers, I think obviously EU and the US and Japan and South Korea have contributed significantly to that sustainability.
Where does this place those relationships with the allies? What impact does this have? That showdown that we saw, Professor Gumede, because you've seen a lot of the allies coming forth, making and openly supporting Zelensky and Ukraine and what has been happening. And I'm wondering, what kind of strain are they under? If you look at what happened and the way he treated and spoke to President Zelensky.
Yes, yeah. No, the first thing is just that the Trump administration has been alienating America's old allies, democracies, and so on around the world, even in the immediate neighbors, Canada, Mexico. Secondly, now I think out of this, really the way he's been, online, we all saw it, the rudeness towards President Zelensky. I think what it has done, it has forced even neutral countries, countries that have been neutral, to be now in support of Ukraine and to actually also, I think, to show their support actively. So there are many countries were supportive and many were neutral, but they, in the past, did not necessarily provide the resources, for example. I think we're now beginning to see resources. There was, in Europe now, there is now a campaign to have a European-driven peace effort to help Ukraine. Now, before, there was a lot of talks before, but, there was no beyond the talks, there's never been this kind of active support and money behind it. I think even in South Africa, we are going to be under pressure. I mean, we know that President Ramaphosa, for example, said that he will invite President Zelensky. I hope he does it very, very quickly. I hope he does it now, because this is the moment actually to sow support and so on. And maybe civil society in South Africa, what we now need to do is, and also the GNU partners, not only civil society in South Africa, but the ANC's GNU partners should say, well, actually, this is the moment. After that public fallout between, Trump and his deputy Vance, and the way they really disrespected President Zelensky. I mean, right there in the open and so on, that South Africa have to now show its support for Ukraine by saying, let's invite President Zelensky, as quickly as possible to the country. I mean, the next few weeks, while the world is still debating the fallout.
Zinka, what has been the response and feedback that you've heard from the Ukraine, given the lies that President Trump peddled, and also the way in which their president was disrespected, and their suffering and the war and what was lost?
I think Zelensky's support remained quite high, even before American president's comment. It was over 56%. I think now it's higher. I think what Ukrainians are treasuring in President Zelensky is that, firstly, during the full-scale invasion, he did not leave the country. When the full-scale invasion started, and none of the countries believe that Ukraine will withstand more than 3 days, and America offered President Zelensky to evacuate, to flee the country, so that they can safely extract him from the attack. He said, "I need ammunition, not the ride." And this famous phrase is something that Ukrainians really treasure, because it shows that at this moment, at this difficult moment, when I think every single Ukrainian was in shock, he showed the leadership that he can stand for the people. Now, 3 years after the full-scale invasion, when there are more than 140,000 documented war crimes, obviously, President probably every week has to deliver, different awards to mothers of dead people, or face mothers of civilian children who were tortured or killed by Russian forces. See those prisoners, many of them who are civilians, who were also tortured and come back after a year or 2 years being in prison. I think it puts any person under a very strong stress. And you feel the responsibility to find accountability for all those sufferings that people had. And this is something that when another country would ask you to compromise on just and lasting peace for Ukraine, I don't think that any president that would be representing this country could agree. So I think President Zelensky also has respect that he still demands just and long-lasting peace, and not just because I think this is because Ukrainians would not allow him to behave in any other way. If any president would make compromise on our territorial integrity and allow occupation to continue without a fight, I think that person would not be a president in 24 hours in Ukraine, because Ukrainians still hold their democracy accountable, and president can only do what people allow him to do. And it's very clear that occupation is not peace, because civilians suffer daily from disappearance, from torture, from separating children from their parents. Children receive different passport, different name, surname, and the parents have no opportunity to even find those children. So this is something that if you understand what is the situation at the occupied territories, you can't even start the conversation that suddenly we will just allow that those large territories and those numbers of people to stay under occupation and to go through those sufferings, and we will not even fight for them.
You can't blame President Zelensky being skeptical and anxious and concerned about negotiations about peace happening between the USA and Russia when, as he has said, Russia has broken all those agreements on numerous occasions. What guarantee is there that on this occasion they are going to hold true?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is very extraordinary. I mean, yeah, Ukraine is really being used, I think, by the Trump administration just as a negotiating tool. I mean, not as actually, part of the players that should be part of the triangle of conversation. So you can't have you can't mediate a conflict where the key player, the victim, is excluded. And the outside negotiator only negotiates with the aggressor, with the perpetrator. That's not a fair negotiation. I mean, also, related to that, if Vladimir Putin, I mean, he's been talking already of giving deals, critical mineral deals, to the US. So deals or minerals and minerals deposits in Ukraine. I mean, to have a conversation as if Russia has won, and as if Ukraine is an occupied territory, and so the Russians are already almost wanting to give deposits that's in Ukraine. I mean, that again is extraordinary. I mean, you already claiming or making the assumption that Ukraine is a colony of Russia, and Russia is at Russia's behest to give minerals to the US. The other thing is, I think that people often forget that 3 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, many people thought it's going to be over in 24 hours or at least a couple of days. If you remember, at that time, and I've written at the time about it, Putin had then briefed the leaders of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. He also briefs, in a run-up to the invasion. And he had actually told them, the leaders, that it will be all over. In fact, he had said, as I understood it, that even before the Russian forces will cross the border, Ukraine will just give up. And on that basis, the other BRICS leaders sort of went along with it. And I think it is already a victory for Ukraine in that context to be here for 3 years, still fighting. Yes, I mean, on the battlefield, there is a very, very tough position, many, many lives lost and properties and assets lost. It's a tragedy, but to be holding out for this long after Putin actually had told his peers in BRICS that it will be over within 24 hours or within 3 days.
Is it about minerals, or what are we not hearing and seeing, Zvinka?
I think what we don't hear that in the agreement that was negotiated between Zelensky and Trump, there was nothing about ceasefire. So actually, the question of how Ukraine can regain its territorial integrity or how the peace can be secured, it has not yet been discussed, because we understand there is no answer. The only person at the moment that can stop the war is Putin. And unless he is stopped, Ukraine will not have peace. So in that sense, there is only one way how Ukraine can defend its territory. It's through a continuing military fight, or for all countries around the world to stay in solidarity and help Ukraine to defend itself. And I think what we see now in the reaction of Europe and Today was also a meeting in London that European countries are willing to come forward and to start defending Ukrainian sovereignty, because they understand without doing that there will be no peace in Ukraine. Since 2014, there were more than 200 rounds of negotiations with Russia, and none of them stayed. So Russia violated every single time when the agreement was reached, because Ukraine gave up nuclear weapon in 1994, and at that stage, Russia, US, UK, and then France and China took responsibility to defend Ukrainian territorial integrity. And now Ukraine, almost 30 times smaller country than Russia, is without nuclear weapon, but continues to defend itself.
Because this is one of the questions that I saw, why would this whole process, in any case, be entrusted to a Donald Trump or to the USA, given what we've seen since his inauguration and all his executive orders? Why would that process even be entrusted to the USA and him in particular, Professor Gamede?
Trump, ahead of his elections, he said he's going to bring peace in the Russia
Middle
Ukraine
East,
and also in the Middle East and so on. So that is his campaign pledge. And secondly, the US is still the biggest economy in the world, and the US traditionally see itself as the big player on the global scene, and Trump himself, personally sees himself as a big guy, in the world. He is. I mean, that's really his presidency, not only in the US, but his presidency around the world, and he sees the conflict that he's going to address it. Now, the problem is that he wants to address it according to not Ukraine's interests, but according to his and America's interests first. Now, that's very difficult, because if you are a negotiator and you want to strike a deal, you have to do a deal that, the victim, there has to be redress for the victim and the aggressor. There has to be, some accountability. That's how you mediate a deal. The mediator cannot mediate a deal that will favor
his own interest,
mediator, actually, and aggressor, and then leave the victim out of it. And I think this is quite extraordinary. Possibly the first time, in modern history, that we see something like this happening.
I'm eager to hear your take, Zvinka. Looking back at that press conference, was it just a power play? What more did you read and see in that? We saw the expressions of those journalists and even the ambassador who was wanting to hide behind her hands, because we felt that embarrassment. But looking at that, given if you're in war, you're fighting for the sovereignty and the safety of your people, it just doesn't make sense that you are talking to people that have no clue what it's like. The first thing they comment is, why are you dressed like that?
Thanks, Lynette. I think there is no doubt that we've seen the law of diplomacy in that meeting. We know that President Zelensky has decided that before the war ends, he's not going to be dressed in suit, because he's representing the country in war. And he's not the only leader of the country who've done that. I think now on social media it goes viral. The photo was Winston Churchill in his also war outfit, which is not a suit in the White House. So this is something that people want to communicate, because why we're wearing our clothing is to communicate specific idea. And indeed, Ukraine is in war. It's been in war since 2014. So in that sense, I think it's understandable why Zelensky has decided not to wear the suit. I think on your previous question with regards to why America is negotiating, we've seen lots of different initiatives, including the African Peace Mission, that also tried to negotiate the situation, because the whole world is getting affected by this war. The food security, the militarization, also the financial instabilities, all that is impacting all of us, and increasing poverty around the world. So it's not strange that President Trump would also want to negotiate, because I think every leader around the world would want to be that party that would make this deal.
The kingmaker.
But maybe we don't learn enough from the history. And the history says that appeasing the aggressor is not leading to peace, it's leading to more large-scale war. In that sense, I think the process that was proposed by Trump, where Putin was not named criminal, and there was not clear statement that what Russia is doing is violating human rights, violating UN Charter, violating principles that American people have held very dear to them for more than 100 years. So now we can see that other countries will step up. Like in today's meeting, UK Prime Minister already announced that Europe and UK will discuss with Ukraine another peace plan, and then they will involve US in that plan as well. According to UK Prime Minister, they've already met with Trump, and he theoretically agreed that this could be a process. So we'll see how the situation will develop. I think the question how Putin can be stopped remains unanswered predominantly. In the last 2 years, Ukraine signed over 40 bilateral agreements to provide guarantees on a one-on-one level, because otherwise, like as we know, Budapest Memorandum, the giving up of nuclear weapon, did not work when Russia invaded. Parties didn't meet even. So there should be a new mechanism how Putin can be stopped. And also we need to find the answer, what will happen if Putin doesn't stop continuing its invasion?
What pressure does it put on these allies and their alliances with the USA, Professor Gumede?
I mean, the US's former allies is a very, very difficult position because, as I say, the post-Second World War, the US actually played 4 big roles. One, as a promoter of democracy. Secondly, the moral authority around the world. And then the US as a leader of the post-Cold War. And now all of that is gone. And I think we now need alternative formations, alternative leadership in the world. So, so Europe have stepped up now. They're busy stepping up. There are other formations from the developing countries has been very, very quiet. I mean, BRICS has been totally absent, and so on. And BRICS was formed to provide alternative leadership from the South, from developing countries. It has been very, very quiet in this process because the dilemma for BRICS is that Russia is part of it.
Russia is part of it.
Yeah, but actually, since Russia is part of the BRICS, it should actually give BRICS bigger leverage power to engage with Putin and so on. So that has not happened. I mean, it's quite interesting also just to look at how the different BRICS members have responded to the Trump administration. So, the original members, this is India and Brazil. I mean, India has had a very soft approach because the Indians want the US market. I mean, been very uncritical. They haven't been criticizing the Trump administration. In fact, what they've done, they've proactively lowered tariffs, and they also proactively promised or suggested that they will take illegal Indians in America back home, and they will buy U.S. oil. In the past, they would never, ever, they wouldn't buy U.S. oil, and so on. And Brazil, on the other hand, is also being strategically very, very quiet. Brazil, of course, their two biggest markets, China is on a downturn, and Germany is on a downturn. So they also need the U.S. markets. South Africa, again, I mean, we have our own fight now with the U.S. and with Trump in particular. I mean, we have been all over the place, very unstrategic. Our responses has been very emotional from the president, from the ANC leaders. It's been ideological. It's been almost based in the old Cold War of the 1980s. And the world is changing in front of us. The world that we know is changing in front of us. So we cannot respond like in the old world way. And we cannot have people in South Africa leading any public discussions from government whose vision and whose ideology sits in the old Cold War in this new change circumstances. So I think now what the world now needs is a vacuum, because the US, by changing so dramatically from being pro-democracy to US interests, and particularly, I think this moment, the Trump-Zelensky meeting, I think it's a moment in history that changes everything. I think, years down the line, we'll come back and we'll say, this is where we actually saw how the US's own power has declined as a leader. I suspect what will happen is that the U.S. moral authority after the Zelensky meeting is going to be declined. It's not going to have that ability to lead, despite the fact that it's the biggest economy, because there's so many people and so many countries who are, I think, angry and disappointed in the way Trump has actually, how rude he and Vance has been, and how disrespectful, and also how they've undermined protocol and let's say dignity, diplomatic dignity, and even conducting negotiations in front of the media. I think many other countries are going to be very reluctant to sit down with the US now, fearing the same thing will happen to them.
It was quite interesting that he said, and I really am eager to hear your take on this, Zvinka, when Donald Trump said to President Zelensky, "You hold no cards." And it made me curious, in his head, which we can't understand, who is holding the cards? Who's playing the game here?
I don't know how to answer this question. I know that it's definitely not Ukrainians because, every single day they're sitting under bombs, and only in the first week of February there were more than 1,000 missiles that fell on the territory of Ukraine. Last night there were again siren for more than 6 hours of continuous bombing. So it's definitely not Ukrainians, because it's not like any Ukrainians that is sitting under those bombs have done anything wrong. They have not done anything wrong. Russia decided that they can take over, and that's what they're doing. They are simply bombing, and then those civilians are made like it's your fault, right? It's your fault that you are sitting under the bombs. So I think in that sense it's quite difficult to understand. But to achieve the peace, I guess we do need united Europe, we need united democracies, and we also need United States to come back to the game, because it is a country with a significant nuclear arsenal, with a very strong security infrastructure. So in that sense, I believe that all countries that are democratic should unite and stay together to defend Ukraine.
He was also said, and very directly that President Zelensky was gambling with World War III. A little bit far-fetched, or a merit in that, Professor Gumede?
I mean, that's one of the sort of the unfair things to put the blame on Ukraine and President Zelensky. I mean, Putin is gambling with World War III, not Zelensky. So that again is really the sort of post-truth, manipulating the truth and perhaps gaslighting. I mean, it really is a case of gaslighting here. Because, I mean, it's obvious who the aggressor is and who, I mean, unless Russia stops all of this, we will stumble or sleepwalk into World War III. I mean, Ukraine is a victim here. I mean, the important thing is why this conflict will have to be resolved in a way that respects Ukraine. Because if it doesn't happen, other little aggressors in other parts of the world will think they can get ahead away with it. I can just imagine, China has been very aggressive about Taiwan. I think they will be watching how the Trump administration is dealing with Ukraine. If the outcome is pro-Putin and anti-Zelensky or anti-Ukraine, they will China will think, well, actually, that's perhaps their moment to take control of Taiwan. And also other little regional despots can do the same. I mean, on our continent, we have Rwanda in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I think depending on how the Russia-Ukraine conflict is going to be resolved, if it's going to be resolved to reward the aggressor, Putin, we are going to have copycat type of regional conflicts where aggressors will think, they can do what they want, and the mediation outcome will also come in their favor.
I know you really touched on the position and also the fact that there was so much silence from some of those BRICS members. I have also noticed in South Africa in particular, there is the separation as if it's happening over there and it bears no influence or impact on South Africa or even Africa. Why is it important for the whole world to watch this, to be engaged with how this is playing out?
I mean, we've already seen, actually, from the day one when Russia invaded Ukraine, how it directly impacted on our economy. And not only in our economy, but on the African economy. For example, just sort of the first thing, shortages of energy, for example, increases oil prices, even here at home, but in other African countries, but at home also. And it causes inflation in South Africa. I mean, I think part of the reason that we have inflation is also to do with the Russia-Ukraine war. That's the first thing. But it's also, commodities. Ukraine is a basket of a lot of commodities that's exported to African countries and so on. So, all of that has a direct impact on us. But even, from a point of view, we are a constitutional democracy, South Africa, and we, because we're a constitutional democracy, part of our values is democracy, not only at home, but to promote democracy abroad, also in the region and outside. So we as South Africans will, must feel worried and feel concerned if there is an undermining of democracy elsewhere. Because that has been our identity. Part of our identity is our constitutional democracy. In fact, I mean, that's the glue that holds us together, South Africans, because we're the world's most diverse society, and the fact that we are a democracy is one of those things that is part of our identity.
Yes, Vinka, please do.
Yes, I think I want to contribute with 2 points. One, that this is a war of a country with nuclear weapon against the countries that gave up nuclear weapon. And I think it's quite a strong sign that none of the countries around the world will ever give up nuclear weapon. And we know that South Africa did that. South Africa also gave up nuclear weapon, but by so openly violating Ukrainian territorial integrity, Putin sends a message to any country that you should develop nukes if you want to be independent. So this is very negative trend, and already in 2023 and even more in 2024, we've seen that all countries around the world spend more funding. In 2023, it was 7% increase on militarization. And this trend will stay and continue, as we can see. So we're going to spending not money on educating children or building better health systems. We will be spending money on building missiles to kill our neighbors. And this is very sad moment in history. So by uniting and defending Ukraine and saying, no, we want to continue the world where countries can live peacefully and not every country needs to develop nuclear energy, is a strong message. I think a second one is that Russia is part of UN Security Council and continuous vetoing any decisions of UN, making UN system simply impossible, incapable to ensure peace in this situation. So it also makes this case and Ukraine a strong partner for African countries to say that UN Security Council should be reformed. And not only African countries should become part of UN Security Council, but we need to have methods how veto right can be overcome. And I think the method where 2/3 of UN General Assembly can overcome UN security veto right could be that mechanism that would bring peace back. But it's very clear that without support of countries around the world to find solution for these issues would be impossible, because it's not of concern for big countries with nuclear energy like China and America that they need UN system. We, smaller countries like Ukraine, South Africa, we need that agreement that we can be protected without necessarily developing nuclear weapons.
I mean, you mentioned, yes, Professor.
I just add to that. I mean, there are two things I actually wanted to add. I mean, it is really the issue on nuclear, and maybe as South Africans we don't talk much about it because we were like Ukraine during the post-world end of the Cold War. We were the two countries actually that made that agreement to end our nuclear capability, military nuclear capability. So it is important, and we should have a bigger conversation in South Africa about that, because I think what will now happen in the way the Trump administration has dealt with that and strengthened the hands of Putin, and then almost backslide. They backslided on Ukraine, on the promises made to Ukraine. It will mean that we're going to have a rise and rearming of nuclear around the world. It's not just ordinary military. Like every country now, countries now will do is they will get nuclear power because as the only deterrent, because we now have no rules. The stronger a country, the only deterrent is to have nuclear. And so I think that's what's going to happen now, and that is why it is so important for us as South Africans, to really mobilize around the nuclear issue. I mean, it's the nuclear civil society in South Africa, unfortunately, has declined. I mean, I know when I was at university, it was quite a big issue at our universities, late 80s and the early 90s. But I think after 1994, that the civil society, the anti-nuclear civil society, sort of demobilized as many other civil society groups. I think for young people in South Africa, it would be very, very important for us to re-engage on this, the principle of it, because then what is the point that we ourselves and Ukraine demobilize, and now will see a rise in that. The second thing is also important why South Africans should care about the way the Russia-Ukraine issues, the way it is handled, because the economic crisis caused by the war in Africa has destabilized African countries, caused lots of hunger, and then Africans move to South Africa to come and look for a living. because they're suffering the consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war. So I mean, in the country now, the big debate in the country is many poor Africans who try to escape poverty in their countries. They try to escape autocratic governments, like we're in Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF is an autocratic government, and poor economies, and now and so on. So they come then to South Africa, migrating to South Africa. So it is very important that as South Africans, that we put pressure on the US also, and other players, and in BRICS, to get a better resolution of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because it has direct impact on us.
If you take this after Friday's meeting, what would you say are the biggest fragilities in the world at the moment, given what we saw, and how do you even pick up that conversation between President Zelensky and Donald Trump?
I think the biggest challenge is that the global security system can be destroyed. And then, as Professor already mentioned, there will be simply many more conflicts around the world opened up, and it means just much more sufferings. And to your previous question, like, are we in a World War III? I think we are, to a large extent, already are, because we can see the involvement of North Korea in Russian invasion of Ukraine. There are already few thousand of North Korean soldiers on the ground there, and the plans to send more and more soldiers. We also see, Iranian drones and Iranian missiles landing on the territory of Ukraine. So to a large extent, we are in the World War III. I think also what we see, that the warfare is innovating and is changing very quickly. I think now we are witnessing the drones fights, so where drones are fighting with the drones, something that maybe previously was only in the fiction movies. Now this is the reality, because indeed Russia has had a strong military potential, and it used all of that on Ukraine, and Ukrainians, when they were left with no other choice but to innovate, have already came up with many different techniques. And unfortunately, this also means that they can be applied in other areas.
There was an argument that claimed that President Zelensky wants to draw out this war because there's an awareness that Russia has been weakened. And how true is that?
I think we definitely see that the Russian economy is weakened. There are less and less data that the Russian Statistic Department is publishing. We also have clear signs that economy is not doing well, the conscription is not doing well, and Russia is unable to move as fast as they can, because the progress that Russia has, it's taking village by village, but in a very long time. So there is no prospects for Russia to take the territories that it already claimed as part of its constitution in a military way. So the only way Russia see it, they can do it, is through some negotiations where Ukraine will be put in a position where it has no support. In my understanding, this would not happen. Even if all external support to Ukraine stop, I don't think Ukrainians would agree to voluntarily give up their territories. So there is this moment also to maybe stop Russia. As we know, Ukrainian forces already took back 50% of territories that was occupied in 2022. So if anyone thinks that whatever Russia takes, no one can take back. This is not true. Ukrainians already got back 50% of their territory, including very large parts of cities like Kherson or Kharkiv region, where massive territory was gained back. So there is this possibility with the right support.
I don't want to labor our discussion because I know that you two are very busy people. I know Professor Gumede has said earlier he might not have to do these late night interviews anymore. But if we look at this discussion and where we are in the world with the aggressor and victims and etc., I would like you to use the metaphor of a card game then, Professor, seeing that Donald Trump referenced it. Who would you say is holding the winning hand right now? Because we all feel fragile, we all feel vulnerable, there is so much uncertainty in the world. And as Zvinka just pointed out, we would never have thought that drones fighting drones could be real, would be part of warfare, which it is. So take a guess.
Yeah. You know, I'm worried that the Trump administration, in particular Trump and J.D. Vance, that they've been persuaded by Putin that he has the cards. But if you look at it, I mean, Putin clearly is a good poker player in the military sense and the political sense of it. I mean, this war has been going on for 3 years. Putin has said it will happen, within 24 hours or 3 days or a week, and so on. Now, if you're a card player, you would say, well, actually, do you have the cards? Yeah, do you have the strong cards? This war's going on for 3 years, and Ukraine is still fighting. And even after this meeting between Trump and Zelensky, what's going to happen is many other friends of Ukraine is now going to give resources to Ukraine. So even if the US pulls back to fill the gap. So this is actually, in a way, it's actually been good for Ukraine. It's not going to be bad for Ukraine. Because every other country will now have to respond. Those who are neutral have to say, well, actually, where do we stand now? And every country will have to make a decision. And then on the other hand, I think Trump thinks he has the cards because he's a new player, and he can drive the process, and only he can persuade Putin to come to the negotiation table. So I don't think it's as easy as Trump would have said that the Ukraine doesn't have the card. They don't have the winning cards. I don't think it's as simple as that. The thing about is, now that we're talking about cards, I mean, from a Putin point of view, the longer the war and the longer Ukraine is holding out, Russia's prestige also declines, because the world has by now expected that Russia would roll over,
would have dealt with, yes,
and so on. Yeah. So from a card's point of view, if you're a card player, how strong is your hand? I mean, you've gone on for 3 years, and you had initially promised that that is going to happen overnight. And just back, I wanted to respond just in terms of on whether we were in World War III. I think in a way I agree with Zvinka that we are actually in World War III already, not in a way that we think, everything has changed. Wars, in a way, the Second World War and the First World War, the way we thought about it, I think has changed. We are actually now in the Second World War. We are just not labeling it. If you just the fact that the Russia-Ukraine war has now actually brought in so many countries, but also what's happening in the Middle East is another war on its own, and the two theaters are getting closer to each other. And the players are intermixed already and getting closer. And then the third aspect of this war is the trade war that the US has unleashed now, the tariff war. So you have got, the one, the security, the military one, and on the other hand, You've got a trade war. So we essentially are in the Third World War now already. So I think our challenge is, as countries, is how do we prevent this war from escalating to other countries? And a key part of preventing an escalation is to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict in a way that does not disadvantage the victim, Ukraine. If we don't do that, if that doesn't happen, it will spill over into a bigger war, so more regional wars, which will then culminate, I think, into a real big war.
Svinka, I don't in any way want to imply that war is some card game, because we've seen the deaths and the sacrifices Ukrainians have made and what's happened the last 3 years. But if you look at strategically and diplomatically at what has been unfolding, particularly then after Friday, who's holding the upper hand at the moment? Or is Russia, have they been the puppet master the whole time, playing their cards against their chest and waiting for someone else, USA and others, to show their hand?
I think, firstly, obviously, it's clear that no one can win without Ukraine. And in that sense, you can say that Ukraine is a key to global security system. But I think also China is driving in a winning seat, because while America might be in a situation when they're starting losing their friends, China can offer an opportunity to be a new friend. And the same for the countries that used to be maybe more aligned with Russia. As Russia gets weaker, China has more and more impact on Russia. And as we can read from the strategy of Donald Trump administration, his idea is to pull Russia away from China, because currently China has too much influence on Russia. So by supporting Russia, Trump hopes to create this counter weight for China. But clearly, under current circumstances, China looks like it can be a winner in this big shoulder guys game.
That's the one country that you did not touch on when we were talking about BRICS, when we were saying what Brazil's response have been, and India. And I was going to remind you, because they seem to have been the silent partner here. They don't feature, but we know they have a lot to gain.
No, absolutely. I think it's China most probably has the most to gain of all of the countries. I mean, it's, they've been strategically quiet. And I think, the more the Trump administration overstretch America and alienates America's traditional allies, China is going to offer an alternative, not only to developing countries, but also to developed countries. So I think, out of the Trump administration, China may actually ultimately be the biggest winner out of its war. I just wanted to come back on the cards. I don't want to overplay the card games and so on. I mean, the fact that Putin wants to use the peace process to gain territory that Russia could not get through the military. I mean, it must tell you something, that his hand is not so strong. Otherwise, he had promised at the beginning that he will take, and Russia will take the territory and overrun Ukraine. Now he is actually forced strategically to try to seek Ukrainian territory and occupation through a peace process. With Donald Trump, and also the fact that Russia is offering minerals, critical minerals, in Russia and in their envisaged occupied Ukraine, to Putin as a sweetener to try to get him to the deal. I mean, that tells you his hand is not that strong then, from a military point of view, if he wants to use a peace process to gain the territory of Ukraine, and if he's even prepared to give Russia's critical minerals, strategic minerals, and also Ukraine's strategic minerals to, that Putin wants to give it in deals to the US in order to get a peace on his terms, which says that his hand is not as strong as he would say in public.
Would Ukraine be open to China if there were advances, Vinka?
I think in this few years of full-scale invasion, Ukrainians clearly showed that they don't want to bend to anyone. They want to decide for themselves on the future of their country. So, it doesn't mean that Ukraine would not be open for trade and cooperation. Obviously, it would be, but would be controlled by any other country.
Would you say, given the utterances of Donald Trump, how and should President Zelensky try and find his way back to the White House? Or should he rather focus on the help that all the allies have now offered?
I don't know if it's a question for Prof. Gumede, but I do think
I'd like to hear what you say, and then Professor Gumede can respond to that.
I think that definitely United States and Ukraine have a long history of cooperation, and there is a lot of support from people in America. So I do think that the two parties would find the way how to continue collaborating in a more balanced and beneficial to both parties way.
Professor
I
Gumede?
think the way out now for President Zelensky really is, I think, a three-pronged process: align with allies and new allies, and through them engage the US. So kind of like one front. The second front is to continue to engage with the Trump administration directly, and then for me the third one would be to directly appeal to the American people. So almost building a front inside the US that could put pressure on the Trump administration. So continue the engagement with the Trump administration. Secondly, build a front outside with the new allies, with Europe, and so on, Japan, and then also with developing countries. Outside, continue with developing countries, with Africa, other developing countries, Brazil, India, and so on. And the last one, a direct appeal, continuous direct appeal to the American people, to almost build to build support from within America, from ordinary citizens.
Zvinka, this definitely, the outburst and the showdown that we saw on Friday has reiterated and reshifted the focus to what's happening in the Ukraine. And I haven't seen enough stories of the suffering. You hear it in analyses, etc., but not you haven't taken necessarily an interest because it's not your war, it's happening elsewhere. Do you think now the world is sitting up and taking notice and a little bit more aware of what has been happening the past 3 years?
I think the fact that President Zelensky spoke in the interest of Ukrainian people shows that Ukraine is not anybody's puppet, and that what opened up doors for communication in many other countries. Because while Ukraine was independent, is independent, and hopefully will be independent, I think through Russian narratives, many people saw that maybe Ukraine is controlled by the US, that it's not Ukrainian people fighting for their survival, but maybe this is a US that is forcing Ukrainians to do anything. So in that way, I think it definitely showed that Ukraine has been fighting for their independence, and people might look then closer, because we are not interested in something that when people are manipulated, but especially for South Africa, a country that fought for its freedom, I think there will be more opportunities for dialogues and for South Africans understanding what's happening in Ukraine, because the situation is really, really difficult. There are more than 20,000 of Ukrainian children that were forcefully taken to Russia. Their citizenship has been changed, their name, surname have been changed, they are registered as orphans that were born in Russia in different areas. So making it extremely difficult for their families to identify. And even South African President Ramaphosa in July 2023 said that Ukrainian children should come home. He said it into the face of Putin, but Putin just said no. And, so it's very difficult to work on that. And we can see that crimes against civilians in 2024 have significantly increased. It's an exponential rate on the deaths of civilians in 2024, because now Russia is specifically targeting civilians by drones. People cannot get out of their houses closer to the front line because they can be deliberately shot from the air. So yes, I hope that there will be more understanding of what Ukrainians are standing for.
Are there any recommendations of channels, publications that we could follow, websites that you can recommend, Zvinka, so that we can be up to date and know what is happening? Because, well, we all must admit, and we know that there are various narratives, even in media, and what we are exposed to. So any recommendations that you can make or say or share?
I'm part of the Ukrainian Association of South Africa. It's South African-based NGO that unites Ukrainians and South Africans. And I think because this organization is based here, it's probably the easiest way to connect. But otherwise, I think there are it's difficult to recommend one specific channel. Maybe Prof. When there will be more objective, because when I think I can't say one out of so many.
I understand. So, but it's the Ukrainian Association of South Africa, and I take it that's the website? Is that the website's name?
uaza.co.za.
Just repeat that for me, please.
uaza.
uaza.
.co.za.
uaza.co.za. I just want to make sure that we have that for anyone who wants to read and join and follow what's happening in the Ukraine developments, the Ukrainian Association of South Africa. Your thoughts to wrap up, Professor Gumede, particularly if we talk about what to go, because I saw you profusely making notes there, so I assume you want to share that, and let's wrap.
From a wrap up, I think actually maybe this perhaps this turning point, the fallout, sort of public. I don't want to call it a fallout, but maybe it's way. The unfair way in which Trump and Vance engage with Zelensky actually potentially is a moment almost could be of good to Ukraine. And why would I say that? Because I think sympathy, even in South Africa, for example, along two ways. A lot of pro-Russian South Africans made the argument that there was a war between Russia and Ukraine is a proxy war between the US and Russia, and that Ukraine is a puppet, is being controlled by the US. Now clearly, now people can see that's not the case. That Ukraine here is actually the victim. I think at least neutrals and many others who were sitting on the fence will be convinced of Ukraine's position and Ukraine's vulnerability and Ukraine's case. So that I think will be very, very important from a global opinion and an opinion in many other countries, because even across Africa, there has been a sentiment that it's a proxy war between the US and Russia, and that Africans should stay out of it. I think now that has been shown it's not the case. I think that Zelensky actually came out good in the way he stood up for Ukraine, and he stood up strongly, and he came out, I thought, really showing that Ukraine is an independent country, and he asserted that, despite the fact that he was almost, he was almost like in the lion's den there, with hostile media, hostile Trump group, and sort of top leadership of Trump. I think actually he came out, he responded, I think, appropriately, given the difficulties. And he actually managed, in his response, to strengthen Ukraine's position around the world.
I want to thank you, Zvinka, and Professor Gumede. Thank you so much for joining us so late on the Sunday evening, but it was so important that we have this discussion. If you want more information about the Ukrainian Association of South Africa and what's happening in the Ukraine and other perspectives, please go and join and follow it on uaza.co.za. Thank you for your time this evening, and I appreciate the insights that you've brought to our discussion. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I do hope that you feel welcome to join us again in the future, Zvinka and Professor Gumede. And if it means I need to move it earlier, then that is what we will do. I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That is Professor Gumede and Zvinka Kachur that were part of our discussion this evening on Amplify with Lynette. I am sure that whenever you listen to this or hear this, that you might say, mind blown. So many and so much information that Zvinka herself shared with us that we were not aware of. And maybe also now we understand what's at play, and also the fragilities, what's the risks if we don't pay attention, if we don't become involved, if we don't read, if we don't inform ourselves about what's been happening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please feel free to like and subscribe and share and make others aware of the discussion. Not only this, there are many other videos on the channel that you might find interesting. So I really appreciate you watching and commenting whenever you do. I might not be there physically, but I do appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us in our discussion and your comments and liking and recommending the live, because this is what we do. We need to make context, make sense of things that seemingly is nonsense. Not really, no, is it? Have a great week ahead.